You know how I always tell you we've got an awesome interview or a fantastic interview for you guys today? Well, today we actually have a psychedelic interview for you. Damn. Okay, I'm looking forward to this journey of the mind. Come along with us. We're going to talk to Daniel Pinchbeck. He is many things. He is co-founder of the web magazine Reality Sandwich, founder of the think tank Center for Planetary Culture. He's featured in the documentary 2012 Time for Change. He's written for Esquire, New York Times Magazine, The Village Voice, Rolling Stone, co-founder of Evolver.net. I can keep going. But mainly, the author of Breaking Open the Head, a psychedelic journey into the heart of contemporary shamanism, 2012, The Return of the Quetzalcoatl, Notes from the Edge Times, and now his new book coming out. How soon is now? An excellent question. Daniel, welcome to the Turks.
No, thank you for having me.
Okay, no problem. Have you done drugs, Daniel?
Apparently, yes.
Talk to me. So there's a lot we're going to discuss, but first, let's talk drugs. How much and how often have you done what kind of drugs?
Well, I mean, my main interest has been psychedelics. My first book, Breaking Open the Head, was on psychedelic shamanism. And it actually was the outgrowth of a kind of existential crisis, a spiritual crisis. I'd grown up as a scientific materialist, and then I wondered, is this it? Is there any other, thing? Is there any other aspect of like a soul or other dimensions of consciousness or whatever? And then I remembered my psychedelic experiences in college, and I ended up going to West Africa, to Gabon, where I went through an initiation, taking iboga, which is a psychedelic, which is actually now being used as an addiction treatment. And I went to the Amazon in Ecuador to work with ayahuasca, with a tribe there called the Sequoia. I visited the Mazatec Indians in Mexico, which is where we rediscovered the mushrooms, the 1950s. And I had a huge number of experiences that really changed my whole worldview and my understanding of the nature of reality. I had many psychic, paranormal, transpersonal experiences, shamans telling me things that seemed like incredibly magical about my past or ancestry or whatever. And so my worldview changed, and that kind of led me to writing the second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, because I realized that our modern civilization had kind of suppressed, ignored all of this knowledge from these indigenous and shamanic cultures. And then I realized that if they had a different way of understanding the world than we do, like a different access to the world, then we had to think about what they were saying about the world that we're in now. And many of them have prophecies about this time as a time of transformation, recreation. The Hopi talk about it as the fourth world to the fifth world, or the Maya talk about it as the age of the fifth sun to the age of the sixth sun. So the second book was an effort to try to understand. I feel these three, the books are a trilogy in a way. There was Breaking Open the Head, was like, what is actually happening here? 2012 was kind of like, why is this happening? What does it mean? And this one is, what do we do about it?
So when do the Jedi return?
I hope so. The Jedi?
Because, if it's a trilogy, at some point there's the return of the Jedi, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Well, but it might connect those. And what an amazing coincidence, because I did the Gabon, Ecuador, Sequoia trip too. No, I didn't. Okay. No one has done that combination. Okay. So many things to discuss here. I don't know where the right place is, but let's just jump in. So it's funny, you mentioned these different times. That's also in Western culture too, the age of Aquarius, and then there's supposed to be a new age coming up. But Daniel, I feel like whenever I talk to religious folks, and I don't know that you're religious, and I don't know, we'll get into what it means to be shaman and et cetera. They're always telling me that, like, hey, it's right around the corner, Jesus is about to come back, right? And hadn't happened yet. So is there some element of, we're hopeful folks and we think maybe our Messiah is around the corner, or is there reason to believe that, that how soon is now? It really is around the corner?
That's a very good question. Well, I don't consider myself religious. I mean, I consider myself in a way kind of rational and scientific, but that rational and scientific investigation, I think probably some people would laugh if they heard me say that, involved also understanding kind of like consciousness, our own subjective experience that we're having. And I do think there are reasons to think even more now with what's happened with this election, that we're on the cusp of some type of transformation or system change. And I mean, when I listen to the Young Turks, I see what you're doing. You're very much about this present system and what can we do to make it better and more humane and reform it. And how soon is now is more about this idea of that it may be that there's something more like a radical system change or transformation that we need to bring about. And I try to look at it from almost like an evolutionary systems level perspective.
Yeah, so I want to dive into that too. So I kind of jump forward there to near the end. Let me go back and understand some of this better. So first of all, I'm totally with you on consciousness. So some scientists become hardcore atheists, and what I mean by that is, and this is not fair and it's not the right terminology, because I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic atheist, and so they think, well, this is all there is. The rock is the rock, and there's no difference between the rock and a human being, because we're all a collection of cells, that those cells are just configured differently than our cells, and that's it, right? Whereas I think...
But a rock doesn't have cells, it has molecules.
Yeah, thank you, that's what I mean. God, man, when I talk science. Anyway, I love science, but when I talk science, okay. Anyway, thank you for that very important correction. Okay, so, but I tend to think consciousness is a little different. It's a little slightly different animal. And so I think that recognizing consciousness does not make you unscientific, it makes you more scientific, because it's a reality of our lives. And trying to figure that out is very difficult, but an interesting quest. So when you went to go figure it out, why? Okay, let's start with the psychedelics, because I think that it's, and then I want to go to religion, and then I want to go to the transformation of society, because I think all of those are interesting topics. I've never done them. Okay. So what is it? LSD? Is it mushrooms? And what? And then of course the more important question is what happens to you?
Sure. Well, my first experiences were with mushrooms, psilocybin, when I was in college, and I mean, I only did it a handful of times, but they were really very profound and amazing experiences. And one of the things that was really extraordinary about them was a kind of deconditioning or deprogramming. So I think that we are so used to being immersed in our world of like cultural, kind of artifacts and symbols and so on, that we forget what's human-made and what's kind of more like phenomenologically just already present or kind of natural. So for instance, like I remember trying to use money when I was on mushrooms and just being shocked that this dirty green papers was what our society placed so much importance and value on, or just suddenly being aware of how people were just totally inattentive, like people were wired into these artificial realities of like the stock market or watching a sports game on television and totally just not present, So yeah, which just kind of connects to even something like Eckhart Tolle and the power of now, how our lives tend to be oriented towards, regrets over the past or worries about the future, and we kind of forget that the only thing that we really have is this present experience, So in a way, like that insight was also a very political insight, because from there you can begin to think about, well, if we've constructed all of these things in this way, political parties and right-angled architecture and, 9-to-5 work weeks and a Wednesday and a Friday, I mean, those are all human constructs. Well, then actually we have the capacity, whether we use it or not, to change those constructs and recreate them in maybe in ways that work better for us.
Yeah, there's some chance that I was born with shrooms in the head, because I do that without psychedelics.
Yeah.
And I talk often on the show about the hardest thing in the world is to escape your own perspective. And so, and when you do, you realize that nothing has to be as it is, right? So we happen to have paperback money. It happens to be green. It didn't have to be green. Money didn't have to be constructed in the way that it does. The work week doesn't have to be 9 to 5. Well, all these things we take as givens are not givens. And so that's not to say some things are not immutable. Gravity is immutable on our planet. I wouldn't test it if I were you, right?
But we test it all the time.
But there are ways around that as well. You just have to expand the mind even further. I fear what would happen to me on psychedelics. There's some chance you wouldn't be able to pull me back. Okay, so, but I love that
Why would you want to go back necessarily?
Well, because I want to bring people along with me.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I do that too. I try that also.
We do need that transformation, and we do need it in the real world. So, okay. Shamanism. My people, the Turks, were originally from Central Asia and were originally shamans. And in fact, one of my best friends, his last name is Shaman.
Okay.
Okay. So is that is that a religion that originates from Central Asia and East Asia? Or when you say shaman, do you mean it like a naturistic religion that is across the world?
I wouldn't call it a religion. Shamanism is the spiritual practice of traditional or indigenous people. It's often people who come from a, pre-writing, pre-literate kind of a culture. And yeah, like all around the world, you find examples of it. The word is from Siberia. It was Mircea Eliade was a historian of religion who wrote a book about shamanism, archaic techniques of ecstasy, and he found that these practices were very, very similar all around the world, which I also discovered when I went to West Africa or Mexico. It was quite amazing how these shamans had this way of working with these visionary plants, and many aspects of the rituals around them were very similar. So shamans tend to be the psychopomp, kind of the guides who introduce their people to the spirit realms, who lead the young people through initiation, who kind of hold the knowledge for the community, and they're the ones who know these other worlds in a way.
So that's where it gets interesting and dicey when we talk about the spirit world and other worlds. So in some sense, since I'm not attached to the way things must be, I'm very open to it. And in other senses, I worry that it is not true, right? So walk me through that. What does that mean when they're tripping on their local plants and they're seeing visions? Like I trip on marijuana. Okay, yeah, my brain is structured in a way that if I do a half a cookie of an edible, I'm gone. Okay, I've got demon cats, and I've got I release bliss into the world and trap fear in a closet, and I do all these different things, right? I would have made for a kick-ass shaman. Okay, that's just on marijuana. Okay, so but it isn't real. There aren't real demon cats, and the light on my fire extinguisher is not actually turning into Oscar the Grouch. So you see the heart of the question: what's real and what's not real about those experiences they have, as in the spirit realm or otherwise?
It's a very complex question. I mean, I personally feel that through this process that was like a 10 or year process, I had a lot of validation around there being these other realities, like kind of these occult realities that people like Rudolf Steiner and Gurdjieff talk about. And honestly, I think when you look at what's happening to our system right now, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to deal with it unless they have some type of spiritual center or almost like a mystical idea of there being something else that we're in contact with. A very, very complicated question that we could really spend hours on. I mean, reincarnation. There's actually some good evidence for reincarnation. There was a professor at the University of Virginia who published a 2,000-page book, how reincarnation and biology intersect. And he found all these children with past life recall, and he went and investigated their claims and so on. So a lot of that stuff was covered in my second book, the 2012 book. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question.
So did you ever have a personal experience, because I've heard this from other people, where they experience something that is not in the realm of linear time as we understand it, where someone knows something that they can't possibly know? Or
yes.
Yeah, so give me some examples of that.
Okay, I mean, going back to the first book, when I had my first experience in Africa with the Bwiti and the Igbo, I hadn't told anybody there about my past or my childhood, and one of the shamans said that he could see that my mother's mother was hovering over me. He said that she had died very recently, and that she was in a sense protecting me from seeing different aspects of the visionary worlds. And I was quite shocked because actually my mother's mother was the only grandparent that I'd known when I was alive. The rest of them had died before I was born. And she had died within a year, and she was a very protective, and I could actually imagine her doing that. So, none of those things on their own is convincing, but over time, when you have a lot of them and your friends anecdotally have a lot of them, and you read, if you read Carl Jung's work, like his autobiography and so on, so just over time, these examples began to amass. And then there are certain substances, like one of them is dimethyltryptamine or DMT, which is part of the ayahuasca potion, that has become very trendy, like the South American drink that is a visionary psychedelic drink that's sacred medicine of the Amazon basin. And DMT on its own, if you extract it and smoke it, is an extremely powerful experience that actually will totally, you exit this dimension altogether and you discover yourself in this kind of other dimension just for like a few minutes.
And what is that other dimension?
Well, there's, it's funny, I didn't really think I was gonna have to go back over all this stuff, but yes, of course. The NNDMT, it's kind of like being in, like if you can imagine, like Walt Disney World meets Tibetan mandalas in the 25th century.
Okay.
You know, like hyper real, hyper dimensional. It feels like there's more colors. It feels there's like vast intelligences there that are like way beyond us in terms of their scale and their comprehension and so on. And then the other one, 5-MeO-DMT, which comes from different sources, including a toad in the Sonoran Desert called the bufo toad, is kind of like a white light experience, like nirvana. I mean, for me, that one is like experiential confirmation of what Buddhists talk about as nirvana. It's this idea that ultimately we're kind of unborn and uncreated. And from a physics perspective, it might be kind of you reunite with this underlying ground, which is like the loom of vibrating superstrings that are vibrating and oscillating in all 10 dimensions of space and time at once. And that's something like that is what it feels like.
And so I'll leave this part of the conversation on this note.
It's a lot to deal with and unpack, I'm aware.
Right. No, but that's why I asked about this first, because it's super interesting.
Yeah.
So is that for the hardcore folks that I described earlier, I always think of Dave Kohler, who works here with, rock, humans, whatever. There's no other dimensions, right?
But I mean, what I would say to everybody is that this is experiential and provable. You know, I mean, these are, chemicals. I mean, we know that our brain is a chemical, soup in a way, and you can go and have these experiences, and if you have them with the right attitude, with the right openness, I mean, a lot of people will find that their value system and their belief system and their understanding of the nature of reality shifts profoundly. And I'm seeing that with tons of people, particularly with ayahuasca, which is this visionary medicine from the Amazon basin, that, really seems to reveal that kind of this, the natural world is also kind of like a spiritual reality, a spiritual dimension, and that's really our home,
So that's kind of where I was going with it. So first of all, from physics, we know that time and space are not as we perceive them. We're talking about escaping our perspective. Our perspective is linear time and space that you can see, right? But we know, in fact, it is a fact that space and time do bend, and they are not constant. So, and it's almost as if there's a treasure hunt, and in different places in the world. And remember, these things that Daniel's talking about occur in nature, right? And if you get the right toad or the right plant, et cetera, it opens up your mind. And we only use 10% of our mind. I know it's a little, too simple to put it that way.
Or maybe most people, the Trump supporters, using 2%. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say that. We don't need to make friends right now.
We'll get to that in a second. So, and perhaps if these little treasures that are hidden in the world are, interact with those chemicals interact with these chemicals, you use a little higher than 10% of your mind, and that you are. So the thing that I'm always stuck on, and why I call myself agnostic rather than just an atheist, is that how in the world could we be convinced that we are the highest consciousness in the universe? That seems preposterous to me. It's insanely arrogant. Like, this is the limit of consciousness. Of course it's not. So could there be a higher consciousness? Of course there can. Do we understand it? No, we don't, because we have this consciousness. And so...
that's what Nietzsche said, man is a transitional being.
Yeah. And I've had interviews in the past with the founder of Wired magazine where we talk about how, well, we're always in transition. And so evolution hasn't stopped. And it's possible that we are going to evolve ourselves out of existence. The Homo sapiens are. I mean, one of the ways that we do that is through technology. So we now know how to manipulate genes in the womb. So if we know how to do it, some are going to do it. And then once some do it, more will do it. And then so at the end of the day, we might have these so-called super babies, and then could they wipe us out, right? Perhaps, right, as we did to the Neanderthals.
I don't think we need them right now to wipe ourselves out.
Yeah, we're doing a good enough job on our own, right? So then let's get to that, right? So what do you think is the number one concern in terms of wiping ourselves out and the situation that we find ourselves here on this planet?
Well, unfortunately, barring a Hail Mary pass from the Electoral College, I mean, we're in a very, scary new circumstance. And I'm sure you've been reporting on this. Like Steve Bannon, who's Trump's chief strategist, not only has compared himself to Satan and Darth Vader in interviews, like the Hollywood Reporter, he's also told historians that he actually wants or believes we need another global war. People like Tony Schwartz, who wrote Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, have also raised an alarm that if Trump is in office, it's very likely that he will not be able to control his impulses and will start some type of situation. Mm-hmm. So we're in a very edgy new reality right now, and we need to kind of think fast about what we can do to deal with this situation.
Steve Bannon, sometimes he says things where I think, oh, that's going to work. That's a populist strain that is likely to appeal to Americans. So for one example, when he says, let's spend $1 trillion on infrastructure and create jobs, I go, oh, see, that'll work.
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, particularly if they were talking about renewable energy and retooling our society, which is basically what I talk a lot about in the book, is like, and in some ways, I can't say that I am sorry that this has happened, because from my analysis of our situation, we were already facing a tremendous ecological threat. And under the neoliberal agenda of Obama and the Clintons, and presumably Hillary was going to continue that, we were nowhere near confronting the situation that we've unleashed on the planet. I mean, according to a lot of climate scientists, we're at more than 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the last time there was this much CO2 in the atmosphere, temperatures were 4 degrees Celsius warmer, and sea levels were 100 feet higher. So we know we're at least headed for that. But then we've also learned that there are these huge deposits of methane that are frozen under the Arctic and the Siberian permafrost, and those could cause another 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius temperature warming. And the thing is, that only happens quickly, because where CO2 is in the atmosphere for about 100 years, the methane only remains in the atmosphere for about 10 years, but it's something like 30 times more potent as a heat-trapping gas than CO2. Yeah. So, and we know it's already coming up. We already see these massive geological changes happening. And scientists have said that if we were actually going to try to deal with this circumstance, we would need to reduce our CO2 emissions like 8 to 10% per year, for a number of years, while we retooled our whole infrastructure, for renewable energy. So, if we look at there's an extreme technical challenge that humanity would have to take on if we want to, survive and then I think eventually thrive as a species. And that is doable. And so in the book, I look at that, there's the technical aspects, which include the, industry, the energy, and the agriculture. So for instance, we know that agriculture is one of the major contributors to global warming. Something like 30% of the Earth's surface is being used as animal grazing land. That area could be reforested. By some estimates, industrial farming, factory farming of animals is causing 30 or more percent of the CO2 emissions all around. Mm-hmm. So, we could have a global moratorium on meat eating, or make it reduce it to a tremendous degree, until we get our thing back together ecologically,
Yeah.
So there are technical solutions that require a kind of voluntary initiative on the part of humanity to kind of take this on, as a project collectively.
So let me touch on a couple of things you mentioned there. To go all the way back to Steve Bannon for a second. On the other hand, he says some sensible things that maybe we could build upon, right? On the other hand, he reminds me of a jihadist. So they're always saying, the leaders of the jihadists are always saying, put on the suicide bomb and go into battle and blow yourself up. And I always want people to say, you first, right? And so Steve Bannon talks about, oh, maybe we should have a global war. Yeah, you first. But he's never going to go into that battle. He's going to send people to die in that battle. He's not going to go himself. And same with Trump. So we have Vietnam, and he says that he had a bone spur in his heel. He doesn't remember which heel. He later said at the time he was going to so many orgies that battling STDs was his own personal Vietnam. Okay? So very ready to send other people to die. They never do it themselves, mm-hmm. right? So, and now, for years and years, I've been talking about the great unraveling, where I think we're used to. I grew up in a time where there is order in the world, and relative peace and calm. People think, no, you're crazy. There's the terrorism. There's this. There's that. There's these different. Or the Iraq War. No. World War I, World War II.
Yeah.
The chaos, millions upon millions of people dying, 1800s, average life expectancy 35 years old. We lived
in Europe in industrial society, maybe actually higher in some of the indigenous people.
Yeah, that's right. So in some ways it's possible we lived in the golden era, but that we should not delude ourselves into thinking that remains forever. And so it is very possible that things unravel again. And now today, John McCain on TV, or yesterday, talking about how the unraveling might have begun. He literally used the same word.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we're in that situation.
We're in a deep crisis of all of our established institutions. And and people have lost faith. They've lost trust. I mean, just being on Facebook over the last weeks, liberals, progressives, leftists, nobody, because I was like, hey man, this is great. The CIA, and FBI are saying that like Russia hacked, like we can have a new election maybe. And the liberals and the leftists, even Glenn Greenwald, the reaction is, we can't listen to anything that CIA and FBI say. They've been lying to us, along with the New York Times and the CNN. So just like screw it. So it's that level of loss of trust on multi areas of our society.
Yeah. Again, yesterday, someone wrote on Huffington Post about how. Everybody should understand that these systems work, and Trump deluded everybody into thinking that they don't work.
Yeah.
My answer is somewhere in the middle, which is that, no, guys, not everything is a lie, right? The CIA lies very often, but not every time,
exactly.
Right? The CNN is quite often biased and mainly has an establishment bias
exactly.
that they're not even aware of. But not every story they do is incorrect, right?
I agree.
Yeah, and so what does that translate into the establishment and where we are and the unraveling, et cetera, which is that article in Huffington Post is largely incorrect. So there's a reason why people have lost that trust in the establishment. It's because the establishment, on a macro sense, has set the rules against them to the benefit of the people who are funding them. Which makes sense. And it's very logical.
Sure, and I would say that, for instance, Obama's presidency was an incredible betrayal in that when he won in 2008 with this great promise of hope and change and millions of volunteers who would have done anything to advance that agenda, he walked away from those volunteers and he essentially acted as, from my perspective, which is kind of left-wing, a shill for Wall Street. And so when somebody like that had abandoned all of the promise that people had in them, I think for a lot of people that was like the final straw, just sort of like,
Yeah, that's right. I had a young woman tell me many years ago, I think it was around the 2014 elections. No, I'm sorry, right before the 2012 elections.
Yeah.
She said to me, after Obama, what is there left to hope for?
Yeah.
And so that establishment never got that. To them, Obama's a socialist and oh my God, or like he saved us, he was the savior and the Messiah. Well, I don't know what planet they live on.
Right. Well, a big problem is consciousness is very much formed by the media. That's why it's so wonderful that you're growing and building your media, alternative here. But the power of Fox and so on over the last years, to pull the discourse of the country in such a right-wing direction, and now this alt-right media, this extreme right, like people like Alex Jones, who I thought was an interesting kind of buffoon, talking about like occult conspiracies and everybody's an alien and so on, and reptiles, now turns out to be kind of like underpinning this extreme right agenda. So the whole terrain has shifted super quickly and super drastically in ways that I don't think we could have anticipated.
Yeah, I think that now that we're into hardcore politics here, the main problem was that the Democratic Party betrayed us and I think did a world of damage. The reason I put them as the main culprits is this country was gonna, as you're seeing throughout the world, is gonna go populist because they don't believe in the institutions and establishment anymore, and they are right. There's a 40-year study that Princeton did.
I saw that.
Saying that public policy has no correlation to public opinion.
Right.
It means we don't live in a democracy anymore.
Right.
And it has almost a direct correlation to donor opinion. They captured the government and they stole our democracy. So when you say to that guy who used to have a job at a manufacturing plant in Ohio, oh, you knucklehead, you're stupid, you don't know, just trust the establishment. No, he's not stupid. He's right.
Correct.
He's right. Right. The establishment did screw him.
Right. But
and so when the Democratic Party says, no, the establishment is wonderful, get back in line,
right.
they're bound to lose. That means that they're going to, instead of having a populist left alternative like Bernie Sanders, we got a populist right alternative that leads us into the rabbit holes of Alex Jones and the insanity that ensues from there.
Correct. And, so once again, I always try to step back and look at everything as an evolutionary process because I feel like that's, we're still a species. As far as we think we're different from nature, but actually maybe in a way this is a natural process that's happening, in terms of how we're evolving as a species globally. In a sense, maybe capitalism even is a transitional system because it's now meshed the world together into a global market and into a global mind, right? Through the internet, where an instantaneous, communication, ideas and techniques and so on can, all sorts of things can now move around the world freely and instantly. So maybe this crisis, this institutional crisis, is the necessary catalyst to bring about a deeper transformation of human society. So for instance, this whole idea that those industrial jobs are going to come back, we know that's not the case. I mean, there's going to be increasing automation. I mean, that's our capacity now. Even the Uber drivers are going to be out of work in a couple of years, right? So, we need to be thinking differently about what's the alternative we're presenting to people like those, white working class people who are now tilting rightward. I think we should be thinking about what is like a post-work, post-capitalist, culture. How does that work? I mean, could people have, basic incomes and live in home communities where they have autonomy and, the opportunity to, learn and grow their own food and so on? I mean, is there a totally different type of alternative we now need to focus on and present? I mean, that's what I try to do in How Soon Is Now.
So now let's finally get to the answers, right? And so I love the way you frame it in terms of a natural evolution. So one of the problems that we have now is we're disconnected from one another, and civilization has led to isolation in a lot of ways. And community is something that is integral to our DNA. We need
Correct.
Community. We are social animals. And that bond has certainly been, if not fractured, certainly very frayed. And so maybe the fact that we soon will not have enough money, resources, et cetera, to live apart, but we need to come back together and start to live in communities. Now, we look at it, we just did a story last week, as it's not a positive thing. I mean, New York Times wrote a story about how 6 millennials have to live in one bedroom in New York. And they're like, oh, they're so inventive, and they built these walls, and no, it's because they have to. It's not a thing that they chose to do, right? But maybe there is an upside to that we begin to form closer bonds and rebuild the idea of community.
Exactly. I mean, I think it has to also be a shift in our kind of like cultural mythology, like our story about, who we are and where we want to go from where we are now. We've reached the end of this, exploitative, extractive, capitalist system. It can't go any further. These guys are like the final burning out of that system. Hopefully, we find a way to avert them, going down the, Nazi rabbit hole and creating that type of destruction. And if we do, then we have to figure out what comes next, I think focusing on communities, people coming together, resilience, basic income. I mean, a lot of the ideas that people like Buckminster Fuller kind of foresaw. Potentially thinking about how we can use the internet and communications tools to actually create, truly decentralized and participatory support systems where people can actually make decisions together. And you're seeing that beginning to happen in social movements around the world, like Podemos is a grassroots social movement in Spain, and they've actually been using this internet-based local organizing tool called Lumio to make their decisions. And Lumio basically took the way that Occupy made decisions and turned it into a virtual tool so that any community can come together and make choices together. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation and experimentation in those types of areas.
Well, that's encouraging because anything to expedite decisions in an Occupy world is
Yeah,
better.
exactly. Yeah.
Because if you never experienced it,
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street and other Occupies, they would take forever to make a decision. I once sat through a 45-minute debate on what kind of pizza to
Yeah.
order, right? And so, but all of a sudden they take that and they bring it to the next level and they use technology
Right.
to actually come up with a decision that actually speaks for the community. All right, now we're having an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's, I'm thinking also a lot about time, which was a big theme of the 2012 book, and how we're always like racing in these deadlines. Like, like for indigenous people, time is there's nothing, there's no, rapid progress. So like if you have a problem in your community, you have a tribal council, maybe you spend like a week, day and night, talking it out until you've come to some kind of point of agreement. And, these manufactured debates between these two horrendous candidates, that are structured in these like tiny little time frames. The whole thing is just a way of programming us to kind of accept an increasingly debased and degraded reality.
Right. So here's my first political step in this direction of transformation and perhaps saving the planet, because I'm now sufficiently wigged out about 97% of the scientists in the world agreeing that our situation is dire.
Yeah.
That it's not a nice to have to make change, but it's absolutely necessary. I'm sufficiently wigged out about the methane that is going to get released from the ice caps.
The fact that we're losing 10% of the Earth's remaining biodiversity every 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
We don't, and at a certain point, we just pull apart the web of life and it collapses on us,
Yeah. There's an interesting argument to be made that we are the virus. Okay. But that's a whole other
But
conversation.
we're the virus that could become the immune system.
Oh, I like that twist.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think politically, step one is these oil companies are like the dwarves in Lord of the Rings. In their infinite greed, they have released the Balrog. And so we need to keep the Balrog in the ground. Okay. So we've got to stop drilling. We've got to keep it in the ground. And so there will be some painful consequences to that. And so before we get to we all have to stop eating meat, which, boy,
Sorry to tell you.
yeah, that's a world I don't want to live in.
Or at least reduce it to a tiny fraction, like
Right.
make it a special, like once a week or once a month kind of delicacy.
Okay, but you know what? Maybe that'll help motivate people. It certainly would help motivate me to let's do everything else so that we don't get there, right?
In terms of the meat?
Yeah.
No, the meat is a necessity. We can't keep eating this meat. I'm sorry. We
Okay.
can't.
Let's negotiate bacon later. Okay. But at a minimum, the fossil fuels, you've got to keep them in the ground. We can't keep releasing that carbon into the atmosphere because it then releases the methane into the atmosphere by the melting the ice caps, and it creates a vicious circle. We're literally killing ourselves because some of the most profitable companies in the world want to make more profit, endless profit. I mean, how many billions of dollars do you need? We all live on the same planet.
Right,
It's going to be counterproductive, even to them.
They're also, responding to global demand. I mean, a corporation, in my book, I talk about how that you could look at them as kind of artificial life forms, and we've programmed them to have certain behavior patterns. We've created a game that we call the stock market. We take the artificial life form that's made of like legal data, brand insignias, and so on, ideas, technologies, patents, and we put them in the game machinery of the stock market, and we say you win by enhancing shareholder value and making more profit. So a corporation has no choice to survive. It has to maximize profit and maximize shareholder value. So we've actually created a system that guarantees that these corporations will seek to evade ecological restrictions, corrupt governments, and so on. So if we're going to survive as a species, ultimately we're going to have to address the underlying logic of the game that we've created and change the way we direct these artificial life forms.
Almost exactly what I say, and it's because it's logical, and people have to get this through their heads. It's like there's this old school liberalism, like, dude, making a profit is a bad thing, right? And now I'm being too derisive, but bear with me, okay? And then there is the conservatives who are like, no, making a profit's the only thing. No, guys, it's all about incentives and disincentives, and it's about we created these machines called corporations, and they are, in your words, life forms. And in my words, they're robots. So we created these robots, we gave them programming, maximize profit, at all costs. We didn't write another code saying, but don't destroy the planet. We didn't write another
Right.
code saying, hey, care about the community. We didn't write a line of code that said, care about human beings. That's not in their programming. We wrote their programming. We built these out of control robots. We released them into the world and said, destroy everything in your path so that you can maximize profit. Then we shouldn't be surprised that they destroy everything in their path to maximize profit. You got to rewrite the code.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that you, in my worldview, that you end capitalism. In some ways, you rescue it from corporatism, where you say, hey, if you're going to have a corporation, and we understand the need for limited liability in a corporation, it doesn't mean that that corporation must have a code that's written for it to run amok. You could write other things into the code. For example, in Germany, they labor on their boards. So the boards of corporations is 50% the workers of that company. And you know what they have? An incredibly successful economy and stable economy. Because the corporations then think, well, I want to make sure my workers continue to have a job, right?
So
I just give that as one small example of how you can rewrite the code to have it be more sustainable.
But I mean, we can look at Germany and Northern Europe for many examples, and I agree with you that in many ways they're far more progressive. I think that we also still have to acknowledge, though, that the wealth of our culture and those countries was based on the plunder of imperialism and the incredibly destructive impact that we've had on the colonized countries who are still feeding us raw materials and resources. I mean, through the internet we could have something like a global direct democracy, using a tool like the blockchain, for instance. But we would have to realize that would also involve a tremendous equalization in terms of how wealth and resources are distributed. And we in the first world would have to voluntarily be willing to give up a lot of the excess that we've enjoyed up to this point.
That's why I was Steve, and I didn't understand that before. I thought, why wouldn't people rationally think that everybody should be equal? I mean, why would they think insane things like the hue of your skin should determine your privilege and et cetera? I'm like, and then I realized what the Steve Bannons of the world already know, which is if I got here through that plunder, and if I don't have the access and the ability to do that plunder anymore, well, then my consumer habits, the life that I'm accustomed to, my privilege, are going to start to go down. And he doesn't want that.
I think it's also very interesting to recognize, well, first of all, it is quite, we can say that corporations are, allow sociopathic behavior patterns to become the most effective ones. So for instance, these people in Trump's cabinet many of them are billionaires, and they must be, at this point, somewhat sociopathic to still be, even though you have all the money you could ever want to do anything, you want to take away the last little bit of like health protection or education, from poor and underprivileged people and just leave them, it's hard to fathom, honestly. But hold on, I had a point.
Let me just interject real quick. They're bridge burners, and those are the people that I have the least ability to empathize with and understand.
What I was going to say, though, is one area that's very interesting, that was a constant reiteration through the whole campaign, is this whole area of eroticism and sexuality. And that's actually, it's something that I address in the book, and I think it's something that needs to be brought more out into consciousness, that love and sexuality and eroticism are actually very, very political issues. They have a very deep political dimension, in that one of the reasons that somebody like Trump, or maybe Bill Clinton, also seek, alpha male privilege and power is to ensure themselves to have sexual access, And in a culture where that happens through a dominator and manipulative framework, then those people will just continue to do that in that direction. They'll become, sexual predators and abusers and so on. So, what I think about in the book is like, is there an alternative way that we could be, developing a culture around love and sexuality that would, not make it so that you had to manipulate and distort to fulfill your erotic wishes. And I actually studied in a community in Portugal called Tamera that was started by German radicals who were part of the left in the 60s and the 70s in Germany. They were trying to figure out why the leftist movements, the utopian alternatives, didn't work out. And they began to realize that it was core issues around love and sexuality, jealousy, possessiveness, envy, that would end up fragmenting these communities and these movements and breaking them apart. And we see that left and right now in our society, whether it's Roger Ailes or Elliot Spitzer or whatever. So their idea was to actually create a different social model. And it's a small community, but their model is I think it's about 170 people, based on non-possessive, transparent relationships that are rooted in trust and authentic communication. And they created different social tools that allow the community to come together and express exactly, transparently what they're feeling, how they're relating with each other. So stuff doesn't get kind of caught in the subconscious and end up becoming part of the collective shadow material, which is what I think we're seeing here. So I just wanted to. It's a long discussion also, but I do think that, that's a crucial piece of the puzzle of what's happening. And I was reading an essay yesterday about the alt-right and how many of these young men who joined the alt-right were actually coming from anger. They were raised a lot by single feminist mothers, and they felt anger against women. They felt they couldn't find their way with sexuality. They gravitated to the pickup artist scene. I mean, I didn't realize that this whole misogyny that's been developing through like Reddit channels and so on is very much related to this kind of wound in our culture around love and sexuality.
No question. Let me just quickly give you two thoughts on that. One is that I realized why they target women much more so. So it's if you see the hatred online from the alt-right, it's the trolls, etc., it is almost always directed much more viciously towards women than it is towards men, because they're young guys who are frustrated and they're actually attracted to those women. And like a young 15-year-old, they want to tease that person, and they're angry that they're not the desired by that person. They don't even know you. How are they supposed to? But that anger and frustration is taken out on those women in a public way. And the second point is that this is not a foreign concept. It happens all across the world. This is not a new concept. So how do the Shiites a lot of times get radicals to join them? Right. They say, oh, don't worry, we can do temporary marriages for you. Now, you're frustrated and angry and horny. Okay, don't worry, I'll let you get married to this woman for an hour or a day or a week, right? And then you can get divorced and Allah doesn't mind. And so they're like, yes! So they actually become these radical, violent fighters just to get laid. Right. Because we need to have sex. And the more we bottle it up, the more it explodes in very unproductive ways all across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, there's sex. I guess I'm what's called a cultural Marxist. I didn't know about that term. That's an alt-right term because for instance, I'm a fan of some of the Frankfurt School thinkers like Herbert Marcuse, who anyway, he talked about the sexual liberation that happened in the 60s didn't actually lead to a political liberation or social change that it needed to, and that it was channeled back into this kind of licentious, hedonistic culture. He talked about it as repressive desublimation, was his complicated term for it. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I think we need to have a public discussion around. And also, maybe, I mean, this is going to be very politically incorrect, but maybe there are ways that women have to acknowledge their complicity in this situation. Just as men, have a hunger for beautiful women, it seems like women often have a deep attraction to, men who are in perceived positions of power and authority. And so men then do what they can to get into those positions. It's a disaster for everybody.
Yeah, and we talk about that on the show too, and how it's not just that men are bad guys and I can't believe they'd be attracted to attractive women. Okay, that's how we're built. And women are not like they're the angels and they can do no wrong. Like these are comical ways of thinking, right? We're all human beings and we all have, attracted to certain things and we have to deal with the world that we're in. And by the way, and there's plenty that I'm sure that if we had a couple more hours to discuss that you and I disagree with, I happen to think that the human nature is both deeply cooperative and deeply competitive. And so I don't know if it's 50-50 or 60-40 in one direction. So yeah, of course all those communes break down because of jealousy. And people like,
I do disagree with you there. And I
Yeah.
think the evidence is very good from tribal societies that were really meant to be cooperative. Those societies, people really lived, without privacy, without walls. I visited some of them, and as soon as you visit one of them, you're like, oh, it's like this is like being at home somehow. Like this is like how we're maybe more meant to be. Of course, in those societies had, in groups, and the tribe was the in group, and the word for a tribe often just meant the people, and they saw other tribes as out groups, maybe not even humans or people, so they could be like hunted or whatever. But within the tribe, there was tremendous cooperation, and often people would have multiple love partners and so on.
well, bless their hearts, but okay,
So
again,
I-
it's a
but
long
I
debate.
just wanna say
but
that
when the other tribes come in, all of a sudden they're not cooperative, and they will rip them to shreds.
I think because we've put ourselves in this evolutionary path, where we've now created this very intense global crisis, the only choice is going to be us realizing that we are one human family, that we have one Earth to share, and that we're in a sense one planetary tribe. So I really like, for instance, what Van Jones is putting out with the Love Army. I think that's, when we look at the extreme of where this thing has gone, that's the saving grace. That we make that switch into total acceptance of our brothers and sisters around the world.
So that's where we'll end on. Let me ask that last question then. What is the precipitating event to this transition where you think we can turn the corner and live in some ways as we are quote unquote intended to, by our DNA and based on our best guess as to how we grew up as Homo sapiens, and some of that is in those cultures that you're talking about. I'm worried that the precipitating event is the great unraveling and some sort of, catastrophic series of events that happen in the world.
I think we're going to see some of that. Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called, what was it called? The idea of the book was that when disasters happen, people actually come together very altruistically. And in a way, I guess one of my ideas in the book is that, if we see this ecological crisis and now this political and social crisis as something that we've kind of subconsciously constructed on the part of humanity, maybe we're trying to bring about our own transformation, our own initiation, the conditions for our own rite of passage and initiation as a species to break through the lies and the failures and the obstructions of the current system, and to create that thing that we really could create, as my friend Charles Eisenstein says, the more beautiful world that we know in our hearts is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing our best here to try to, through the media, unpoison the world and get the message out that of obvious things, the things that we've talked about here, which is that we're not meant to be just purely competitive. We don't have to rip each other to shreds. We don't have to destroy the planet. We don't have to fight endlessly, that there is a better way. And so, I hope that all these forces come together before it's too late, not after it's too late. Daniel
It's a photo
Pinchbeck.
finish right now.
That's it. It is a photo finish. Just like this election, razor thin. Okay. So everybody check out Daniel's books because it's really mind-opening. Even if you don't agree with everything you heard here, at least give it a shot and see if you're can be open to a new idea. It doesn't mean you're going to change your mind, but at least be smart enough, interesting enough to try new ideas. And the latest book is How Soon Is Now. All right, Daniel, thanks for joining us on the Amateur.
That was great. Thanks so much. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.